Get hyped, get loose. Coming up this weekend, light heavyweight banger with a combined 80% finish rate and 16 total finishes between them. We have the Black Jag, Carlos Ulberg, former current, male model, taking on Nicolae, and at the rate of getting demonetized by YouTube, Negumereanu, but we're going to call him Nicolae for the purpose of the video, so apologies to all of the Romanian fans that are out there. Matt, due to the sake of professionalism, Nicolae is a darn good fighter, and he's not really the product that we got excited for coming into the UFC. Nicolae was out there dusting guys on the regional scene, and listen, it was a poor level of competition, but for Nicolae, I almost did it, for Nicolae, he was going out there and fighting like if Vitaly Minakov took 12 scoops of pre-workout and decided, let's do this for one round. Yeah. Because Nicolae was going out there ankle picking, grabbing guys, suplexing them, finishing them on the ground. But for Nicolae inside of the UFC, it's been a totally different story. And I'm going to go through during this video, break down the fights that he's had inside of the UFC's octagon, and try and give you a bit of a frame-by-frame ideal of Nicolae. But if you look at it for Carlos Ulberg, you know him, and it's not King of the Ring, it's King in the Ring. He's the former King in the Ring champ, 2017 at 100 kgs, 2019 at 90 kgs. That's where his kickboxing, and that's where his bread really does get buttered. And for Ulberg, you can talk about the extracurriculars, the fact that, and I quote, and I will bring it up as the video goes on, you'll see it, but listen, he's touched on it in the past. He went on and did like an all-male review across the Anzac region. He has the modeling credentials. He was on Game of Bros. He was due to be on The Bachelor down there. The point of it is, for Ulberg, very kick-heavy, very much a tailored kickboxing approach to MMA. Of course, you have city kickboxing fighters on this card. Riddell, Adesanya, Dan Hooker, they travel in pairs. Well, really, 2 pairs makes 4. Exactly. But for Ulberg, we've just seen a little bit of a refinement in the UFC, almost finishing Kenny and Zexu to, getting finished in that fight. But for Ulberg, it's an interesting stylistic mix when you pair him up with a guy like Nicolae out of Romania.
Exactly, and that's why Nicolae, it really comes down to what his mindset's going to be going into this fight. Because if he does fight like that pre-UFC version that you spoke about,
I think he wins this fight 10 times out of 10.
Exactly. This is a very difficult matchup for Carlos Ulberg, if so. Gonna go for a lot of trip takedowns, a lot of chain wrestling too, and that's the real thing that a lot of these classically trained kickboxers have trouble with. They're good at defending that initial takedown attempt. That's just digging for underhooks. That's a lot of physical strength stuff. What they do struggle with is chain wrestling, and that's what Nicolae can do, especially once he gets it into the clinch up against the cage. So that'll be very interesting to see if Nicolae does incorporate the wrestling. Now, I assume he's going to, but it really does come down to how much striking is he willing to do with a guy like Carlos Ulberg, because you're right, with Ulberg, we all knew what his skill set was going to be coming into the UFC. The guy can strike like an MFer, and he's very good at it. He is lightning fast for a 205er, and that's the thing that really stands out. Yes, he has incredible power. Yes, his technique is really good. But we don't often see guys with his level of hand speed in this weight class. These are big fighters at 205, and the way that Carlos Ulberg is able to throw his combinations is very... You hate to say bantamweight because it sounds like an over-exaggeration, but I'm not really kidding when I say it. He can put his punches together in a very effective manner, and it's nice to see. But I think the case with him is always going to be just trying to figure out, okay, how much can I throw and how much can I defend to really figure out what the volume can be to go out there and win rounds. Because for Ulberg, it does feel like he is fighting for a finish, and against a guy like Nicolae, who I think is going to be able to win some rounds with a lot of his clinch work in this fight and just smother some of that fire that can be Carlos Ulberg. I think Ulberg's going to really have to make use of the separation he has in this fight, but the real question mark comes down to how much separation is Nicolae willing to give him?
Well, if you look at it for Ulberg, he does have a really kind of wide stance. Like if you look at Israel Adesanya, same thing. It's a little bit different because Adesanya moves his feet a lot better and he stands a little bit taller, whereas Ulberg is tall and as big as he is at 205 pounds. He does kind of keep a low base. So as far as takedown defense is concerned, I'm sure for kickboxers it's always going to be, top of mind. I was going to say in the back of his mind, but it's going to be top of mind. But for Ulberg, the nice thing about him is keeps his hand almost at like chopper level. Like he's going to keep him right here. He keeps him out and he will do a little bit of a lean back because he is taller than a lot of his opponents. But when you do look at it for Ulberg in the UFC, a fight of the night against Kennedy and Zexu, first round, 83 significant strikes at light heavyweight. Next round, 63, ends up getting finished. His fight against Fabio Cherant, All 3 judges scored at 30-27. He gets the win there. That's his first UFC win. Sharon threw 13 total significant strikes in that fight. He was in gear half for the entirety of that one. And then if you look at it his next time out and you consider like what we're talking in terms of odds, he was a decent underdog, a plus 125 against Tafon Chukwe. Chukwe was bringing the fight towards him, and then he was able to just wobble him, knock him down, finish the fight. So a big win for Carlos Ulberg versus Nicolae, who in the UFC, on just a number of days' notice, he takes on, it was 2 weeks' notice, replacing Gokhan Saki, fought one of Matt's favorite fighters in Saperbeg Safarov. Safarov, all sorts...
Built like a bag of milk, to quote Craig.
All sorts of shenanigans in the cage, loses a point in the first round due to grabbing the fence. That doesn't happen all that often. The judges scored it 29-26, 29-26, 29-27. He was, Nicolae, a minus 170 in that fight. He was a plus 200 against Alexa Kammer. Split decision win there. Wasn't much of a, who won it anyway at the end of it. It was a close fight. You look at his next fight, minus 240 against Ike Villanueva. Beats him by knockout. Plus 110 against Kennedy Nzechukwu. He wins, so by the laws of MMA math, Negumereanu wins that fight. But the crazy thing is, most people thought that Kennedy Nzechukwu won that fight, and the other part about it was Kennedy loses a point due to an eye poke in the third round. If that didn't happen at all, he would have won the fight convincingly.
And that's why it feels like, to me, stylistically, Nicolae should win this fight. He has the edge in grappling, and what we've learned since UFC 1, Hoist Gracie taught us this all the way back when, is normally when you have a guy who's good at grappling and a guy who's good at striking, the grappling tends to win out in MMA. Now, I could also see a world, and I think you could too. Nicolae wings an overhand right. Carlos Ulberg leans back, moves out of the way, crushes him with an uppercut, knocks him out. And Carlos Ulberg looks like he is the next contender at 205. But it does always go back to styles make fights. And I do feel like stylistically, if Nicolae does use his full toolbox and the full set of skills at his disposal, he should be able to win this fight based off his grappling alone. But again, there's a world out there where he goes out there, relies on his jab, tries to act like he's Tommy Hearns, and next thing you know, Carlos Ulberg hits him with a monster left hook and knocks him out.
So the odds in the matchup, Ulberg open a minus 200, minus 125 right now. For Nicolae, open plus 170, plus 102. We have a look at the Tapology votes. Surprise to us as they are to you. I'm going to set the over. I'm going to say over under 67.5% Ulberg. He started as that big of a favorite. I think it's going to be along those lines.
I think it's going to be over.
You think it's going to be over? It's under. 936 total votes. 64% Nicolae. What is that? 65% by knockout for the 36% that have Ulberg, 36% by decision, 59% by knockout. If you watch Nicolae's fights in the UFC, this is where I can go down through every single one of them and break it down frame by frame. The only one that we've really seen any sustained wrestling offense was his fight against Ihor Potieria, his last time out. Why? Because Nicolae was training at Extreme Couture with Eric Nixick, a guy that's going to tailor a camp around the way that you should fight. And for Nicolae, he's able to land those knees. He's able to get the finish. He was the favorite in that fight, a minus 140. But that was a good win for Nicolae to get under his belt. And if he's going to fight with any sense of takedowns and urgency, this would be the fight that I would expect it. But if I back it up, his fight against Ike Villanueva goes for a takedown, doesn't get it. His boxing stance, Nicolae's, is square. He walks guys down square. He doesn't come in at an angle and go square.
Does Carlos go for body shots?
There's a few fighters on this card that will start off, with a nice stance, and then they square up when they get in bad positions. Erin Blanchfield. But for Nicolae, he walks guys down square and tries to land with power. Carlos Ulberg, that's the perfect opportunity to land the body kicks, to land the head kicks, to hit with that. He throws long looping shots when he throws his hooks, and those are perfect opportunities for Ulberg in this fight.
Okay, if the odds were still at minus 200, I would have liked Nicolae in this matchup, just based on what his skill set could be. But you have kind of convinced me into picking Carlos Ulberg, if I'm being completely honest, because I do see him having a lot of success with his own body shots in this matchup. Now, I don't know how often he's going to be able to throw things like body kicks and knees at the middle, because that might help Nicolae go for some of those takedown attempts, catch a kick, go for a trim. It might just help him get on top in that top position, because that's what's really going to matter. If Nicolae can get the takedown, that's great, but he is going to have to prioritize top position after he gets the takedown, because if Ulberg can look really good on his feet for a minute and a half, 2 minutes, you get the idea. Nicolae is really going to have to make use of that top control, get effective ground and pound off, pass the guard, you get what I mean. So I think this is a difficult fight to predict because, again, I do think based on his whole skill set, Nicolae does have a very good chance to win this fight, but I do think he is going to go in there and at least strike with Ulberg for a little bit, and I do think Ulberg has refined his skill set enough to at least defend a few of the initial takedown attempts, go to the body when he has to sap some of the gas tank of Nicolae, and then maybe get a knockout later on if he's able to get some of his combinations working.
It's a tough one. I mean, under 2.5 rounds is minus 155. Maybe you like that one. I like that more than the pick on either one of these two fighters. But listen, popping popcorn for me with the shirt. I do have Carlos Ulberg. I know I did lean that way a little bit. If Nicolae comes in and he's going for the takedown, Nick's got him just dialed in with the game plan, Nicolae should be able to win this fight. He was a national wrestling champion in Romania. He was also a Kempo champion over there as well. And for Ulberg, that kickboxing prowess is definitely the bread and butter. And not necessarily the bare bones, but there's a little bit, it's like me and you. There's a little bit of meat on the bare bones.
But there's not a lot.
There's not a whole heck of a lot. So both of us going with Black Jag, Carlos Ulberg, to get the win. His teammate who is building kickboxing as the Black Dragon, Israel Adesanya, is going to be taking on Alex Pereira in the trilogy at the top of this card. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say. Let's get into it.